What's up, everyone? This is BigPowner. Some people were concerned about, let me drop down a portal, about single target DPS on boss fights. So I'm kind of going to show you guys. I'm trying to isolate one of these bosses, so we can get a few examples. That's a boss. All right. So look at the damage, and I'm now at maximum stacks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you really simple swap, and then we'll look at what the damage looks like with that damage swap on a single target. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm only going to, oh, actually I already had the jewel in. So the damage swap is really easy. Basically you're just going to be swapping in volley fire right here. This is the place that it works at because you can get 40 in dexterity in the radius, which you need 40 dexterity so that it barrage fires 6 additional projectiles. Then we're going to be swapping out our added cold damage for the barrage support. We're not going to have to change around all of our links. Now our ice shot is a barrage ice shot. So now let's see what the damage looks like. 2, 3, 4, 5. So now it's at maximum inspiration charges, and you can see the damage on this. And then I'll swap back. We have one more boss, so let's look at the damage on this at max inspiration charges. Now let's jump back out, and we'll switch back to the ice shot and kill him with just ice shot. So you have kind of two examples back to back of what the difference is in the damages looks like. I'm gonna take this out because obviously we would not have that in. And what I'm not going to do is get this guy against terrain, because so you can kind of get an idea of what the damage looks like. And I'm at max inspiration now, so there is a little cheap trick you can do with let's get him against a cheap trick you can do with ice shot is you can get him against something like this, and you can get multiple hits with the cone, which gives you more damage if you're just using the ice shot, but obviously that's not viable on some bosses. So what I'd like to say about this is the calculations for this have to be done manually. You can't do it in POB. You can check that yourself if you would like. The way that you can get an estimate on how much damage it's actually adding by doing the swap to you um, is by going ahead and going into path of building, change out one of your support gems, select barrage fire on your barrage ice shot link, then you would go to the barrage and you would select all projectiles. You can at this point then go ahead and swap out this jewel in your path of building, and you will see that there's like essentially no change at all to the damage. And you would think, well, it says barrage fires an additional 6 projectiles simultaneously on the first and final attack, so another 12 projectiles, and I only have 7 projectiles. So why is it not changing anything? Well, it's because path of building doesn't account for the mechanics of this jewel. So if you really want to know how much damage it's actually adding to your to that skill, you would have to, the easiest way to get a rough estimate is to basically take the damage of the 7 projectiles and then average them, or whatever your number of projectiles are. Maybe you have an extra projectile on your quiver, which is obviously going to add more damage, because that's kind of how barrage works. The more projectiles, the more damage. And then just divide the average damage and multiply it by those extra projectiles and add that to your damage. Just make sure that you are swapping out in your path of building, turning off whatever skill gem you're going to be alternating it for if you want a realistic projection, because obviously we're not making it a 7 link. So the advantage to barrage is it will do more damage. The disadvantage, you really have to be close in order to get all of your arrows to hit, which if you're not hitting with all of your arrows consistently, then you're not going to be doing increase damage, because you know, if you're not hitting with the arrows, it doesn't really matter that your potential damage is higher. In general mapping, I don't think this is worthwhile doing at all, even though it is a pretty easy swap. Just to me, when I factor in the damage that that my totems are adding, which like the damage the totems projected is really mis mis misleading when you look at the DPS on this, because you know this says I have 22,000 DPS when in fact they're adding like over 1.5 million DPS. Um, so it's when I factor in the damage of my turrets and my ice shot, and I factor in what barrage is adding, and I think about this when I'm running a bunch of maps, um, there's a lot of bosses that I don't want to be close to, and there's definitely a lot of metamorphs that I don't want to be close to. So, am I going to want to constantly be swapping in and out for a small increase in damage in maps? No. But if you're concerned about having maximum DPS that this build can do for you with an easy change, is this a viable option to change out for Sirus? Yeah, because how does the Sirius fight work? You want to be in close combat basically with him the entire fight for several reasons. First of all, you're fighting in a circle, and the radius he shoots attacks in a radius. You're trapped inside of a circle, and obviously, if you're closer to him in the circle, there's less distance that you have to travel in order to avoid the projectile, because obviously if I'm way out here on the outside of the circle, the diameter of the circle is a lot larger, but if I'm right next to him, that diameter is tiny, so I barely have to move to avoid it. Plus the advantage is what is it that our bow does? Our bow gives us 30% more damage at close range when we have iron reflexes. So that's even more reason to be in close combat, because that's also a thing that path of building doesn't take into account, is our added damage from our arborix. It doesn't take into account the attack speed, and it doesn't take into account that the more damage. um, so the truth is, you really just running the build like this, I mean, I'll get up a video killing Sirius. I haven't been farming him. My farming method is working good, and I'll give you a spoiler alert. The Sirius fight ain't about having one specific build. The Sirius fight is about knowing how to do the fight. It's kind of like the Conquerors. When you first fought the Conquerors, you might have thought one of them was like, holy shit, this shit's impossible. It's because you don't understand the fight. The DPS of this build is more than enough to do Sirius at Awakener 8, even without doing a barrage swap. What's going to be the hardest thing for you? Learning the mechanics of the fight, because there's huge gaps. Like, I can't just go fight Sirius 4 or 5 times in a row and figure out the mechanics. There's huge breaks in the amount of time that I get in that fight. And I'll tell you, I'll be honest, the first time I fought him, I was like, holy shit, this shit's impossible. It's broken. But after you fight him a couple times and you start figuring stuff out, then you know the first stage is really easy, because you're like, all right, I figured out a way to get to him, and then you're like, all right, well that's done, and then a new stage starts and you're like, shit, this is impossible because I don't know how to I don't know what's going on. It takes experience, and anyone that's telling you this build 100% of the time beats Sirius, that's bullshit. Because the biggest factor in beating Sirius is knowing the fight, and that takes practice. You can gain knowledge by listening to players or watching footage, but take take what you can from those videos. Take the knowledge of watching what they were doing and what worked. Like, I'll tell you, I've watched videos on it, and most of the videos, did I learn something because I saw the fight mechanics? Yeah. Was their advice good? Hell no. Because I saw a video where someone was like, you just stand in this corner. Just stand in this corner. Like, basically they got lucky on their kill, because what their advice was to basically go off and stand in a corner and wait for Sirius to engage them, which that was completely, they acted like they knew what was going on, and they gave horrible advice. They got 100% luck is what won them that fight, because now I understand the fight pretty well. And I tried that method and failed the 2 times that I tried with that method, and I was like, they just won by luck. And the reason why is because I learned how the mechanics work, and they basically just got lucky because they weren't doing anything to control the terrain. They weren't doing anything to control Sirius. They just got lucky, and then they were like, "This is what you gotta do. You win this 100% of the time if you do this." And that's not true. They're telling you to stand in a spot where if you spawn the fight, you've almost guaranteed that you're gonna lose. And that's assuming that randomly Sirius decides to move to you and let you engage him, and randomly the storm that spawned decides to move away from you. So take what you can learn. I will get a fight video up, and I will give you the knowledge that I have learned, and I will show you that this build can do it. I ain't gonna use barrage because the build has plenty of damage to do without. But maybe your gear's not as good as mine, and you still want to start practicing the fight, and this is a viable option to add some damage. Anyways, thanks for watching. Peace out.